Next to Touchdown Talk. Today is episode 5 of the Touchdown Talk series, and we have with us Eddie from Big Ten Quick Talks. Big Ten Quick Talks is a small channel that Eddie has started, I believe, just a few months ago to maybe a year ago. He is my exact age when I really got into college football with Sam and started producing consistent content at the age of 18. So go over to his channel. It's just Big Ten Quick Talks. Should be the first thing that pops up in the search bar. And after this live show's over, I'll put his channel name in the description and in a pinned comment. Just go and give him a subscribe and hit the notification bell on his channel, also my channel if you haven't already, and watch some of his content because he is going to be on here. And two young minds who I think are better than a lot of the college football beat writers who are full of brain rot are going to be talking about a lot of things with you, such as conference expansion as it relates to the Big Ten, some bold predictions that I have, that Eddie has, and also that some of you have. We'll actually be reading two of your bold predictions that you all gave me on my my community post that listed two of my bold predictions, asking you which one you thought is bolder and encouraging you to write down bold predictions. And I'll be cycling through those in live streams and potentially dedicating videos to them. But that's a long introduction. And before we finish off the introduction, how are you doing, Eddie? And what motivated you to want to come on here?
I am doing great, Sam. Um, Really what motivated me to come on here is really getting to know more people, expanding my knowledge. Hearing lots of takes is better. You can't just stick with your own take and just think that that take is absolute. So I love hearing other people's takes and what they've got to share. And you know, that's it on my end.
Well, I think that that is a pretty respectable opinion. And that's actually why I started Touchdown Talk, is to invite people on consistently on a weekly basis to, whether it's challenging my opinions or affirming them, it's mainly just stating their own. I mean, every single guest that I have had on here so far has had some pretty big things that they disagree with me about in terms of college football. Mainly with like teams and rankings and who are the best players, all that sort of stuff. Not necessarily on what we're going to be talking about, though, to kick off this stream in regards to Big Ten expansion. One quick
Right.
thing before we do that, though, just so everyone knows, we will be reading super chats, like immediately interrupting our stream to read super chats. If you don't want a super chat, that's totally okay. Just know that your comment, question won't be read until the end of the video where we do a short Q&A session. That's just because the channel's growing and this live stream, the better I get at streaming and the more consistent I do this on Thursdays at around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the viewership's going to grow. There's going to be more engagement, and I want to make sure that I can engage on some level without everyone being overwhelmed or trying to race to get my attention. So that's why I have that rule set in place. Just wanted to mention that before we get into our first topic of today's show, which is Big Ten realignment. You could also say college football realignment as it relates to the Big Ten. I know that whether it's Clemson or Florida State or Miami, I've even heard Virginia, North Carolina, it looks like the ACC is the next conference. In fact, I think it absolutely is the next Power Four conference that is destined to fall apart, especially given the whole grant of rights fiasco and the fact that the ACC essentially sold their soul to guarantee that their floor would be moderate, but completely locked their ceiling into what is now oblivion. They can't compete with the SEC and the Big Ten, and I would argue they can't even compete with the Big 12. What are your thoughts on the ACC conference and what the Big Ten can get from them? And what are teams in general that you, if you were in the position of Big Ten commissioner, or just from your perspective, some teams you think the Big Ten should bring into the fold?
So, as it pertains to what you said before, I 100% agree with you. It can't, the ACC, they can't compete with the Big Ten. They can't compete with the SEC. And from what I've heard, you know, the ESPN isn't thrilled about bringing them back on after their TV deal is done. So, another red flag in the ACC. And the ACC as a whole is probably the weakest Power Four conference. I think pretty much everyone would agree with that.
Yes.
Um, you know, the Big 12 is really going to be interesting. That's a side note. That's another topic for another day. But when it comes to the ACC, you really, and conference realignment, you have to start with Florida State, in my opinion. Florida State, the Big Ten has had probably the most activity with them, I would say. And the SEC has really backed off of talking about Florida State. And I know that they have been in conversations, but from what I've heard and from what I've read, is that they've really um, not talked about them as much in recency. And the Big Ten has continued to try and court it away from the ACC. Now, that doesn't mean that the SEC can't get back in, but be that as it may. And the Florida State doesn't like its deal with the ACC, and this is a common theme with the power schools in the ACC. You think of schools like Florida State, schools like Clemson, schools like Miami. They don't like the deal that they have right now, and they want a better deal, and they get a better deal in the Big Ten and the SEC. But we're talking about the Big Ten here.
Absolutely.
So I would say if the Big Ten did add Florida State, I would not want just Florida State it just as a regional thing. I would rather have a couple Southern teams added, not just Florida State on an island down there
Absolutely.
as well.
Would you rather
Which
have
leads me,
Miami or Clemson to, like, if you had to choose between the two to pair with Florida State?
if I had to choose between, it's a good question. If I had to choose, I think I would go with Miami.
Same here.
I think I would, because I think Miami um, is a better program overall. It has a better history, in my opinion, and that's the Florida market is really robust, and that's something that the Big Ten really, really likes, is those markets. And when they're adding, they take that into consideration.
Yes. Better market. I think Miami's more dedicated to football. You see that with NIL, the portal.
Absolutely.
Like, yes, Dabo Swinney is, even with the program, like, I think falling apart before him, I still think he's a better coach than Cristobal will ever be. But at least Cristobal and the support network that Cristobal has established is better. And I mean, Clemson's athletic director moving to Miami. I forget his name, but Clemson's old athletic director
That's
is
right.
Miami's current AD. So I think that
I do
is
remember reading
the,
that.
yeah, Miami's just better. And
Yeah.
Miami Florida State at its peak is a better rivalry than Florida State Clemson. Better history, and like you said, better market, more talent. Would you like Clemson to join? Like, just because? Like, not even playing what ifs?
If
Or,
you, sorry, if you are turning the Big Ten Conference into a 24 team league or a 26 team league, then I would say yes. I personally, if I was the Big Ten commissioner, I would limit it at 20, just because I just inherently, the college football in me doesn't want this to turn into the NFL.
yeah.
And I would rather it stay. I mean, we're already past 12 teams or 10 teams, but I would rather it stay 20 rather than approaching 30. That being said, if we were to go to 24, Clemson, let's not act like it's a bad school. I mean, Clemson would be a pretty good addition. I just think Miami would be a better addition.
Yeah. Certainly a better addition than Wake Forest or Syracuse.
Come
or
on now.
Boston College. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. That would not be a good sign if the Big Ten added Boston College. I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah, it'd be rather pathetic. Um, the ACC, I agree with you, like, on an average basis, is the weakest conference. However, I would say that whether it's Miami or Florida State or even Clemson, because of their recruiting, their talent, and a variety of other things, they do have a higher ceiling. Like Florida State or Clemson or Miami, they have a lot of blue chip talent, and the Big 12 just doesn't have any of that. But the Big 12 is deeper. I think the worst Big 12 programs, middle of the pack Big 12 programs, are better than the worst and middle of the pack ACC programs. You told me in the warm up, in the preparation for the show, that you wouldn't just look at the ACC for additions to the Big 10, but you would look Big 12, maybe even Notre Dame, which I think is the obvious. I mean, it's an
It is
obvious
pretty
goal of
obvious.
anyone. What do you think the Big 12 offers, and how realistic do you think it is for Notre Dame to join the Big 10? Could they even join the SEC?
So when it comes to Notre Dame, I, it's probably the most talked about team on here on this list, regardless of team. When it comes to realignment, they're at the center of it, I would think, and most people think. My stance with Notre Dame is that if Notre Dame wanted into the Big Ten and they really wanted that, I think it would have already happened, in my opinion. I think they were definitely a higher priority than a school like Washington. You could argue Oregon either which way, but um, that's beside the point, really. Notre Dame is a school that everyone on the planet should want just because of the ratings that they get. I mean, they get everything there. They really
Yes.
do. So, in my opinion, if they wanted into the Big Ten, then they would have already been in there by now. That doesn't mean that they can't add them though. And I think that to a it's going to come to a stance where um, they're going to be the only ones out there on the island, and it's going to be the SEC, the Big Ten, and probably the Big 12, although they'll be a step below, a couple steps. And the ACC, in my opinion, is probably going to turn into what the Pac-12 just did, imploded, and I think it's going to take a little bit for that to happen, but I think it will happen eventually. You look 5, 10 years down the road, and Notre Dame's going to be the only one out there on this island, and everyone else is going to be on the mainland. So, in my opinion, they're going to have to choose a side. And if they did choose a side, I would think they would choose Big Ten because of the regional aspect. They won't have to travel near. I mean, if you're in the SEC, just on a practical standpoint, if you'd put Notre Dame in the SEC, that those air miles are going to add up. They're
Yes.
they're traveling south half your games, and if you're in the Big Ten, you have Purdue, Indiana, Northwestern, all within your radius, like right there. So on a practical level, on that point, I think that the Big Ten is obviously better than the SEC when it comes to courting Notre Dame. And then also, the Big Ten will. It's not like the SEC will give them so much more money that they can't refuse. The Big Ten will give them tons of money,
Yes.
and that's something that obviously a lot of teams. I mean, that's really the main goal of this is money. So
Yeah. I
when it
mean,
comes to Notre Dame, will they join in the next 6 months? I doubt it. It could happen, but I think they will end up joining in the next couple years.
that makes sense. And what I was gonna say is, yeah, I mean the Big Ten didn't get the Texas and Oklahoma level, like in terms of on the field football success that the SEC did. I mean, maybe you could say that Oregon and Washington in recent memory have had that, but the combined history of on the field success and Oklahoma appearing in the college football playoff several times, Texas just being Texas and always recruiting well, that was big. But in terms of markets, the Big Ten won the expansion war with the SEC because you got Seattle, you got Los Angeles, and they have New York City with Rutgers, who's improving as a program and,
Oh yeah.
and gaining fans and gaining attention. Maryland's the same way with Loxley. I mean, they've had 3 bowl appearances in a row, and they find ways to lose games that they should win, but then compete in games that they should get blown out in, which entertaining football draws viewership.
100%.
And with Florida State being in contact with the Big Ten and maybe Clemson and Miami, I mean, that'd just be a whole other media market. So, yeah, I think the Big Ten would win that bidding war against the SEC if it came down to it. I personally would almost want Notre Dame if they don't want in the Big Ten. It'd kind of be cool to see them join the Big 12 because I really don't want a Big Ten SEC only college football. Like I want there to be 3 or more power conferences forever. I can't do the 2 division NFL light Walmart NFL
Well,
type
we
stuff.
can't we can't do that because it already exists. Like we don't want to see the mini NFL.
No.
No one wants to see that. What makes college football so great is not just the pageantry, is not just the play on the field, is not just the memorable rivalries, it's the actual structure of the game is different than any other league out there. Um, so I would love for the ACC to stay. I would love for them to stay and for them to get good, for them to get better. Um, but if you face reality here, some of these teams will move on.
Yes.
Um, in an ideal world, we bring back the Pac-12 and we have a lot more variety, and we have college football at its at its best when it's robust, and you have all these conferences going, and you have all the conferences succeeding. But we don't live in an ideal world,
Yeah.
and obviously the SEC and the Big Ten rule this world. So, and I would love for the Big 12 to stay on and keep their teams. And if you think about the Big 12 as well, they have great depth too. I know this is we're getting off topic here, but there's some teams in there that could really make some noise.
Yeah. I don't think that's off topic though, because there is one more team that we wanted to talk about, and that's Utah. I would really love to see the Big 12, the Big 10 rather, add Utah. They fit the bid with the American Association of Universities. I think that's what's called, the AAU.
Yeah,
They fit the
right.
academic bill. They're a consistent football program. I don't know what they'll be when Kyle Whittingham leaves, but right now they're good. I imagine they'll get someone good. I think Utah's a pretty good job with what Whittingham has built there. And outside of like maybe Iowa State for the sake of rivalry with Iowa, or
Right.
Kansas for their basketball program and the fact that it looks like they care about football now. I think Travis Goff's a pretty good athletic director. I can't see much else, but there are still some teams, like you said, that have good depth, even though they're not known for being football powerhouses. Like they could make noise
100%.
in football in other schools.
Yeah, when it comes to Utah, in my opinion, would be like the ultimate bridge between the Midwest. When you have Nebraska being the most Western team in the Midwest and really in that part of the country, and then the West. So, I mean, if you look at the Big Ten on a map, you have Nebraska here, you have everyone else over here, then you have California here, and I think Utah would be a really good bridge between this gap that we have just regionally, and then among with everything else you said, their on-field success backs up their strong case. I mean, Kyle Whittingham, you can't imagine he's going to stay there for the long haul, like 5, 10 more years. But he's built that program to an identity that matches what the Big Ten has. Strong, physical. run the ball, play great defense. So I mean, they fit the bill. Now, are they just going to be content in the Big 12, or are they do they already won out? That's the big question with them. And the other big question is, does the Big Ten actually care to take them? Me, as the Big Ten commissioner, would love to take them and would take them in a heartbeat. But in the real world, where the Big Ten commissioner would they and the board would they really want them? I don't know. Hopefully they do.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, in an ideal world, things would stabilize. Lincoln Riley would own the Pac 12 with USC and have crappy defenses and get blown out in the playoff. But that's not what's happening here. The Big Ten and the SEC are slowly absorbing everything. I mean, my thoughts on Big Ten realignment are I do think that Florida State to the Big Ten's happening. And I think that they'll bring one of Miami or Clemson or maybe both of them with and try and get Notre Dame, or if not Notre Dame, like North Carolina or Virginia or maybe Virginia Tech, something like that. That's my thought on Big Ten realignment. I would love Utah to be added, maybe some Big 12 schools, but really I do want to leave the Big 12 alone. Like I do want, if it's SEC and Big Ten dominating, fine, but leave the Big 12 like where it is. Just do that.
I
Uh,
100% agree. Like, it's no fun when like we said, it's no fun when it's just the mini NFL.
no, it's not fun at all. Plus, some will say, "Oh, well, the Big Ten and SEC will dominate forever." Well, from what we know now, absolutely, but it's very, very, very hard to predict the future. I mean, the one constant in college football, I don't know, I'm not an expert in college football history, but the one constant that I understand is that the SEC has dominated much of everything in terms of on the field success for a lot of modern college football. And the Pac 12 and the ACC and the Big 12 and even the Big 10 in some years have been incredibly weak. So maybe the Big 12 can have some teams that actually make significant damage, or I don't know exactly. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Big 10 realignment and such. Let's move on to bold predictions.
Oh, these are always fun.
Yeah, this is coincidentally also the time when Josh Pate is doing bold predictions. He is,
Oh, I love Josh Pate.
yeah, he's good at producing like pretty quick segments that are just easy to listen to. The
Oh,
longer
yeah.
stuff I have to multitask while listening to, like Cover 3, for example. Shout out to all those different channels. Yeah,
Right.
that's what he's doing right now. I wanted to get a little bit of ahead of him so it didn't look like I was like copying him, but I'm not. I did this last year and I intend to expand upon it more this season. We're going to start off with your bold predictions, go on to mine, and then touch on two from my subscribers. Your first bold prediction, or one of your two, is that Syracuse wins 9 or more games and competes for the ACC championship. How about you explain that one to me?
Right. So I think the big headliner that most people know, if you're in this, if you really pay attention here, is Kyle McCord transferring out. And I hate the hate that he gets. Kyle McCord was a pretty darn good quarterback for Ohio State. Not good enough for Ohio State's lofty standards, and couldn't beat Michigan. But he was good for 11 games out of the year, and he was. And he transfers to Syracuse, but that wasn't the only name that they brought in. They brought in players such as Yazid Hines from Georgia. He was a 4-star interior offensive lineman. Joshua Miller, also from Georgia, and corner Marcus Washington, not the Nebraska wide receiver, but 4-star from Louisville, a corner. So it's not like Kyle McCord was their only guy that they got. They got multiple guys to help out this team. And one of the main drivers to this pick to win 9 games is you look at their schedule. I cannot find many losses on the schedule at all. I'll quickly read it out here. They start at home versus Ohio, at home versus Georgia Tech, versus Stanford, versus Holy Cross, at UNLV. So right there, you can't. I I try to find losses here. It's hard. Then they play at NC State. That's going to be a tough game. At Pitt, that's going to be a tougher game. They get Virginia Tech at home, at Boston College, at Cal, versus UConn, versus Miami. Out of those names, I can really find. I mean, Miami right there. That's probably going to be a loss with the transfers that they got, that Miami got, and I can't find too many losses. NC State and Virginia, I think they probably split those two, and then Pitt's going to be a wild card. Excuse me. But past that, I can't find losses on this schedule, man. And plus, the additions that they made make me more confident in them to win these lower to mid games in like Georgia Tech or Boston College. That getting a player like Kyle McCord who's played in big games. I mean, he didn't play the best against Notre Dame last year, but he pulled out a win. So he's been in these big time situations on national TV. So really Syracuse is going to be a step down for him. So I think that Syracuse is going to get to 9 wins and by default going to be in that top echelon. Now, are they going to, well, top echelon for the ACC title game? Now, are they going to be as good as some of those top teams like Florida State, Miami, Clemson, North Carolina? No. But by default, by having 8-9 wins, I think they're going to be right there with them.
Yeah, they'll be like Louisville last year. Weak schedule, exactly. Especially weak conference schedule, because they had Notre Dame to their credit. Syracuse doesn't have a team that even looks to be as good as Notre Dame last year. I look at the schedule and Georgia Tech at NC State, Virginia Tech, Miami, maybe at Cal, and maybe at UNLV, but that's still like 6 automatic wins in my mind, and they'll probably come close to splitting all the games that I mentioned. They also, ironically enough, they brought back one of their former players. I think corner Deuce Chestnut went to LSU last year, and then after getting injured in that whole defense looking like garbage, he's coming back.
Right.
So they have like a lot of SEC and Big Ten transfers, particularly SEC, because Fran Brown, their head coach, was one of the key and best assistants at Georgia. And then he brought Elijah Robinson, Texas A&M's former D-line coach, who's a ridiculously good recruiter, along with him. I researched their staff. It's impressive. It's impressive for a Syracuse staff, for an ACC staff.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. All I was saying is I like this pick. I don't exactly agree with it, but I don't think it's as bold as many people will think.
I mean, it's not the boldest out there, but it's still a bold pick. Like you said, I mean, I didn't know too much about Syracuse really until they got Kyle McCord, and then once you start to research what they have, you mentioned the coaching staff and these other players that they got, and it's hard to really not like them except for last year, where they didn't perform great, granted. But you look at their schedule, with the players they got, I think it's reasonable, a reasonable bold prediction.
Yeah, and they have a good running back too, and I think LeQuinton Allen nearly ran for 1,000 yards last year as a younger player. So they have some skill talent at running back, QB. They have some defensive players. They have some trench players too. They could just be 6-6, or they could win double-digit games given that schedule, and if everything is put together. I'd list this like on a, like, let's say 1 to 5 scale. I think it's just simpler than 1 to 10, because I think 1 to 10 with all these predictions can kind of get a little like inconsistent. On a 1 to 5 scale, I'd probably list this as like a 3 or even like a 2.5. 1 is like not bold at all. 2 is like a little warm. 3 is probably modestly bold. 5 would just be outrageous. 5 would be like picking Ohio State to go like 8-4
Yeah,
is
yeah.
what that would be like.
I'd say this pick is probably about a 2.5, 2.7, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then your second one was Kansas competing for the college football playoff, which I
Right.
love, but I want you to take this away.
Right. Jalen Daniels, I mean, we would probably be having this conversation last year if Jalen Daniels would have stayed darn healthy. And he's going to be must see TV. He is an electric quarterback. He is, in my opinion, this might be a bold take as well, that he will be in Heisman conversations once the season's over if he stays healthy. That's the big thing with Jalen Daniels. Really, the dude has to stay healthy, man. He is just an awesome player. He could be a first round pick, but he's got to stay healthy. And they have really, really good players on this roster other than Jalen Daniels. Guys like the senior running back Devin Neal, corner Kobe Bryant. Those guys are also going to be higher draft picks as well. And then, lastly, if you look at their schedule, it's not too much of anything really. I know I keep going back to schedules, but that's so important in my
Yes.
opinion. They play Lindenwood at Illinois, home against UNLV, at West Virginia. That can be a trap game right there. But they have TCU at home, away at Arizona State, home versus Houston, away at Kansas State. That'll be a big one there. Then home against Iowa State, away at BYU, home at Colorado, away at Baylor. And I mean, it's not too bad for a team like Kansas who we have expectations for. And I do expect them to be placed in between 20 and 25 when the first polls come out. I think Joel Klatt had them at 23 if I was not mistaken, something like that.
Yeah.
Um but they could crack the top 15 really easily if they are ranked 22nd, 23rd. I mean, first part of their schedule really isn't that bad. The second part of the schedule heats up with conference play, but it's not bad either. But again, this prediction will go down in the dumpster if Jalen Daniels gets hurt week 2
Yes.
or week 3.
Yeah.
Jalen Daniels has to stay healthy.
I absolutely agree with that. They lost a lot on defense and they also lost their star offensive coordinator, but they return a ton offensively, especially at skill position, and they've used the portal nicely. They've gotten some blue chip players. I know for a fact from the Big Ten, Michigan's younger offensive lineman Amir Herring, and then by Job, Michigan State's highest ranked recruit, I think in the 2023 class. They got
Okay. Yeah.
them in the portal. Like just as a side note, in the fact that they're using the portal and they're building up their talent, not just in recruiting where they've also gotten some 4 stars, but the portal. Lawrence Arnold, Luke Grimm, they had a few hundred receiving yards. I think Lawrence Arnold was close to 1,000 yards last year. Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw Jr., that's one of the better running back rooms in the country. And Daniels, when healthy, is one of the best quarterbacks, could be the best quarterback in the entire country. And also Kobe Bryant, who's good at corners. So they even have a good defensive player. All that to say, them competing for the college football playoff, many would look at that and think, oh, that's a 5. Like, that's outrageous. But if they just reach the Big 12 championship game and win,
Exactly.
they probably get the auto bid unless the Big 12 is super weak and you have a 4 or 3 loss champion and a group of 5 team with a tough schedule that does well. They, looking at the schedule that you provided, their toughest game will be at Kansas State,
I
maybe
agree.
hosting Iowa State, and maybe if you want to go out a limb and you can say that West Virginia will be one of the best teams in the Big 12, you could say that. But they avoid Oklahoma State, who was in the Big 12 championship game last year, and they avoid Utah, who's essentially the unanimous pick by most analysts to win the conference or at least be the best team in terms of power rankings. Very favorable schedule. I would go out on a limb and say this team could, if everything goes right for them, go 13-0 with that schedule. And they could
I
win
mean,
close games. They could win some dominant performances with that offense where they just overwhelm people. But that would be like their ceiling, of course. and they're probably not winning a playoff game. But to even get to that conversation would be absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and I mean, I think West Virginia will be a trap game, especially since it is in Morgantown. I think that they will be, they being West Virginia, will be very good. But I mean, you look at the schedule. That's a game that I'm worried about. At Kansas State, I'm not worried about really. Like you said, Iowa State, but they have that game at home. Um, I'm not concerned about the rest of the schedule for them at all. And if especially if they start the year ranked, even if they don't win the Big 12, they could sneak in there as a last minute seed, especially if they start ranked and they don't, and things go their way. Maybe they have a 10-2 season and I don't know, somehow don't make the Big 12 championship, which now that I say it, I don't think would happen. I think a 10-2 Big 12 team would make it. Be that as it may, if they had 10 wins and they made it to the they would probably be a 12, 13, 11 seed, in my opinion, depending on how the dice roll. But I think, there's more than one way to get in the college football playoff now, and I think Kansas has a couple avenues here.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, and the Big 12 is one of those conferences where, because they're so deep, things could go a variety of ways. They could have like multiple teams finish the year 11-1 with only one loss in conference. They could have like three of those teams, or they could have like the top three teams finish with two losses or three losses. Like you don't know what the Big 12 will be. There's no obvious hierarchy like there is in every other conference, where the SEC, Big Ten, and ACC, just sheerly by talent, you can separate out three or four teams from the rest of the pack. You can't do that in the Big 12 outside of maybe Utah, but even then they don't have the top 25
Yeah.
talent roster.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, even then with Utah, and I love Utah this season, and I think they will end up winning that auto bid because, but it's definitely a possibility that they go out there and lose 3, 4 games. I mean, you can't count anything out with this Big 12 because it's not like they have, like you said, they don't have that upper echelon of teams. They don't have the Ohio State. They don't even have like a Penn State level team.
no,
I think Penn State would easily win out there. Um, but they have everyone on. They have like 6 teams that are like a B plus level team, and then everyone past that, like Colorado's going to go crazy on some team. Like you can't count out the rest of the Big 12. Baylor's going to upset a couple people. Um, TCU's going to win a couple games. So when you take into that account that, I mean, the Big 12 is pretty crazy.
Dana Holgerson, like peak peak ba- peak brain rot, not utilizing your talent properly. Dana Holgerson nearly beat Texas, and there's no Texas in the Big 12. Like
Yeah, no,
that.
no Texas and no Oklahoma. That's
Exactly.
a big thing right there.
I would list this as just because competing for a playoff, I only envision really the auto bids from the ACC or the Big 12 having a guarantee of getting in. I don't think there's a guarantee that more than one team from a non-SEC or Big 10 um, con- conference is getting in. So I'd put this at probably a 3.5 or 4. The top 15 part, I would put it like a 2 or maybe even close to a 1 because I think they're winning double-digit games too, or at least 9. So at some point they'd be flirting with that. But it's not outrageous at all, and I could see it their ceiling. This Kansas team winning the Big 12 and potentially being undefeated or maybe just a play away from it. Well, thank you for sharing your bold predictions. It's time to share mine with the college football world. My first one, and many people know this because I made a video on it several months ago, is I think Rutgers is winning double-digit games. And I think that they could compete for the college football playoff. Not exactly that they will, but they'll be competing for that. and they'll win double-digit games. The reasoning for that is their top 10 in returning production, whether it's Gavin Wimsatt, who portaled out, or Ethan Kaliakmanis. I thought Wimsatt would win the job. I was obviously wrong, but ultimately Kaliakmanis was the best fit for the staff, and the quarterbacks weren't really that different. What I'm more concerned about is the fact that Monungai comes back, most of their O-line comes back, they return Christian Dremel, who is a good receiver, and defensively, they return Mohamed Toure, Robert Longerbeam. I forget that one defensive lineman that they bring back, defensive end, their main defensive end, but they return him, much of their interior defensive line. Aaron Lewis is who I was mentioning at edge.
Oh
So
yeah.
they have a lot of returning players, and then Jai Patel at kicker. So a lot of roster continuity, a lot of staff continuity. And here is their schedule. And this will make more sense to some of you as well when we talk about our Big Ten power rankings. Rutgers hosts Akron after they host Howard. Those are their first two games. Then they have a bye week. They play at Virginia Tech, host Washington, play at Nebraska, host Wisconsin, host UCLA, play at USC, have another bye week, host Minnesota, play at Maryland, host Illinois, play at Michigan State. Certainly not the easiest schedule in the world, but by Big Ten standards, that is pretty easy. No Penn State, no Oregon, no Michigan, no Ohio State. None of them. None. Virginia Tech, in my opinion, could be the best team on their schedule. And I don't think Virginia Tech's a top 15 team. I think they're top 25. But if USC's still down, if Nebraska continues to fumble all their opportunities away, and Wisconsin is still trying to find their identity, and Virginia Tech, everything goes right for them because they're, I think, number 2 in returning production, and they have some good players, they could have a schedule whereas last year they faced 3 teams that were power rated top 5 or higher for much of the season. They don't face any of those type of teams. So, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate this at all. I really like this. And you go back to their schedule, really after USC and their last 4 in Minnesota, Maryland, Illinois, Michigan State, they should be able to win all 4 of those, which is winning games down the stretch for me is huge. Especially just going into, for momentum purposes. And, they got their cupcakes on there. At Virginia Tech, like you said, that's going to be a tough game. At Nebraska, Nebraska's a tough place to play. But they get Wisconsin at home, which I think is huge. I think Wisconsin is very good. At USC is really an outlier in the excuse me, an outlier in the Big Ten. But I really like the fact that they bring back Kyle Monungai. Monungai, in my opinion, will probably again be the best running back in the Big Ten, yardage wise, probably, with the amount of times that they run the ball. And they play a prototypical Big Ten style of play. They're going to have a good defense. Like you said, they're really, they have a lot of returning production on their team. The one problem I have with Rutgers is Kaliakmanis. He was bad last year. He wasn't very good last year.
He was
So,
terrible.
I mean, lost a job to an FCS guy in Max Brosmer. That's another conversation. But, they'll give it to Monungai 400 times a game. So, presumably that would kind of mitigate Kaliakmanis. And Kaliakmanis definitely had room to grow. So, presumably if he does grow, maybe we'll be competent. Maybe. But Rutgers, 10 plus wins. I put this at probably about a 3.5, 3.
That's
I think
exactly
a
what I
three.
was thinking.
I think a 3 is good there because it's not outrageous with this schedule, especially if they go out and beat Virginia Tech on the road. Having Washington come across country, I think that'll be a huge advantage. They could go into the Nebraska game undefeated, and if they do drop a game at Virginia Tech or at Nebraska, that's not the end of the world for them. I mean, they would just have to win versus Wisconsin or at USC, and I think they'll probably split that, be it they win at USC or win versus Wisconsin. So really, I don't disagree with this at all. Will they win 10 games? I don't think so. In reality, I think they might drop one or two. But this is the essence of a bold prediction, right?
Exactly. Yeah, 3.5, maybe 4. Part of me thinks 4, but I'll settle with 3.5 only because after watching a lot of spring games for the Big Ten and looking at the portal, I think their schedule in my mind is tougher now than it was a month ago. But that's just me, and it's still overall a pretty easy schedule by Big Ten standards. And yeah, I mean, what they'll do is they'll run it all the time. They'll chew clock. They'll force turnovers. Only teams who are physical in the trenches will be able to dominate them. And the only teams that really are that physical in the trenches are Michigan and Oregon. Maybe Ohio State at parts on defense, I would say. Offense, there's a lot of questions there on their O line. And I really do, and I really do think it's Oregon and Michigan in terms of physicality. And they don't play them. They don't play Ohio State, who has really good skill players and probably the nation's or at least Big Ten's best defense coming back. Though Michigan could have something to say about that, or Penn State or Iowa. They even avoid Iowa, who's their look-alike in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll hand it off to Monungai all the time. Kaliak-Manis will have one or two toxic deep shots. He'll hit one of them. And they'll beat some teams to death with field goals and just running it. I think they'll be a lot like 2021 Michigan, just a Walmart, less talented version. And I think that'll help them win a lot of their games. My next bold prediction. I don't think this one's as bold as the Rutgers one, but another part of me thinks it's like infinitely bolder, at least in terms of national media expectations. I'm just going to say it, and then I'll ask you what you think, and then I'll explain the logic or perhaps the insanity behind it. Texas is going to miss the college football playoff. They won't even make it.
Miss it.
Yes.
Huh.
What do you think about that?
That's interesting. I'm pulling up their schedule here right now. Talent wise, just off the top of my head, I mean, they lost their two best wide receivers. They lost a lot of kids to the draft. They really did. Um, you know, I guess if Quinn Ewers doesn't turn out as lucky as he was last year, or results, then I could see this happening. And the SEC is really muddled this year. It's very good. It's very good. Um, just looking at their schedule too, as I just pulled it up, they play at Michigan. Um, you know, they play Oklahoma. They play Georgia. Florida, sneaky team. Sneaky team. They're gonna play them at Arkansas, Kentucky, at A&M. I'd probably put this at a 4.5. This is a bigger prediction. I'm gonna say
Understandable.
it's interesting though.
I'm going to put it, if you factor in national media expectations, I'd say a 4. From my own personal opinion, I put this at a 3 or 3.5. Their secondary stinks. Their interior D line is losing a ton. I mean, they're bringing in Bill Norton to try and make up for 2 first and like second round NFL picks in Sweat and Murphy. That's not going to do anything. Their secondary, again, pedestrian. Their offensive line was good last year. It was never elite. It was never near elite. I disagree with Joel Klatt when he says that Texas versus Michigan is going to be this matchup, this battle of trenches. That's probably going to be Oregon, Michigan, where you'll see the nation's best D-line in Michigan and one of the best O-lines playing one of the best O-lines and a very underrated D-line in Oregon. But I think that Texas just has questions in the trenches, more so defensively. Their offensive line should be one of the nation's better ones. Their secondary isn't good. They do bring in Bolden, Silas Bolden at wide receiver, and Isaiah Bond at wide receiver, and Black at tight end. So they reload, I think, at skill position. And Jonathan Brooks goes off to the draft. But they do have, I mean, they've recruited at a very high level. And I don't question their offense a ton. But having said that, the SEC's very deep at quarterback, and
Oh yeah.
Silas
Oh yeah.
Bolden, Isaiah Bond, C.J. Baxter, Jaden Blue, and even Andrew Makuba, who transferred in, I think, from a Clemson, good safety. And Malik Muhammad, who was played as a true freshman last year, he was pretty decent. They are not they are not going to save you alone from Connor Wiegman and Moose Muhammad, or they're not going to
Right.
save you from Carson Beck and a loaded wide receiver and a defense that should be the same or better than last year. They're not going to save you from a Michigan team who, even without passing the football, could probably run for miles and miles on Texas's defense. That's
Yeah.
making that's a bold assumption in and of itself because they were good at defending the run last year, but their two best players by a mile in that skill are gone, and those were all American defensive tackles. They're out of the picture, and I mean anyone, and I mean this, anyone could throw on that secondary last year. And they have, I don't think they've made the necessary moves to correct that to the degree that they need to. And one more thing, I think Ewers is very, very overrated. I don't think he's consistent enough to be an elite quarterback. He can show elite flashes, but he's he's not generational, and he's not consistent enough. Last year against Washington, he started out like horrific, and it took
Oh yeah.
Washington being inconsistent for a quarter and not being an uber talented team, which they weren't in depth, to let Texas come back and nearly win the game.
Yeah.
And they faced an easy, and I mean this in retrospect, pretty easy schedule once you adjust for the fact that Alabama wasn't really good at the beginning of the year and only started to be good at the end of the year. I don't want to take away too much credit because that's unfair, but I do think there will be a reality check when they hit the SEC. I think they'll lose to Michigan, definitely lose to Georgia. I think those are two sizable losses. And then that third one, it could be to A&M. It could be, just looking at their schedule, it could be against Oklahoma. It could be, if everything goes right for Arkansas, could be Arkansas. Yeah, it could even be Florida for the simple fact that Texas last year played in several close games.
Yeah. Really quick on Florida, I will say they have a pretty good roster. I was looking at them recently. They have the hardest schedule by far that I've ever seen. It's insane how many top 25 teams they'll have to play. Be that as it may, going back to the Michigan game, the fact that I mean, it's not going to be a battle in the trenches in that game. It's going to be Michigan dominating in the trenches in that game. What's going to make or break that game is going to be Michigan's. Is I think it's going to be Alex Orgy. I think you know Michigan, even losing Rod Moore, they will be able to relatively lock up in the secondary. Um, just analyzing that game a little bit, but really, when it comes to that game, having it be at Michigan in the Big House is huge for me because of the impact that that the Big House has on every team that they play. You know, for I'm not going to say the crowd forced those two picks that McCord threw in the Ohio State game in the game, but you can't say that they weren't a part of that. That is
Yeah.
one of the top environments in college football. So, I mean, when you look at that game, and as I look at that game, through a different lens, it becomes less likely that Texas is going to be able to compete. Now, Texas is going to run up some points. It's not that they're not. It's not that Michigan's going to be able to shut them down for very long. They'll run up some points. Coach Sarkisian is probably one of the most aggressive coaches out there. More aggressive. Now nowadays everyone's aggressive, but really through your explanation, I can see it a little bit more. I'd still put this at about a 4.
Yeah. And Texas can beat Michigan because even though Michigan, I think, has a massive advantage in the trenches, Michigan this year is only trench play. I mean, they have
Right.
nothing proven at receiver, quarterback. You can't have only one tight end as your primary receiver. And Donovan Edwards, I'm going to give him benefit of the doubt and say that he's elite. Even if you give him benefit of the doubt, you still need a passing game that involves wide receivers and not just Edwards and a tight end. And what Texas can do is, even if they're losing in the trenches, they can just overwhelm Michigan with skill position play and big plays. All it would take for Texas to win that game is maybe one or two long touchdowns, and maybe they can sit and afford to, you know, let Michigan control the clock because we can just, pop a big play or so. But I don't
Right.
think Texas has beaten Georgia, for example. I think what Georgia will do
Oh
is
yeah.
they'll walk into that stadium, they'll chew them up, they'll spit them out of their mouth, and they'll move on like nothing happened. I mean, Georgia,
Georgia, man.
they did
I mean,
that to Tennessee 2 years ago. Granted, it was in Sanford, but they made Tennessee look like they were nothing. And that Tennessee team, I think, will be better than this Texas team.
oh yeah. And you look at what Georgia does in relation to Michigan. They're identical teams with their philosophies and what they do. Georgia just has Carson Beck, which will probably be one of the top quarterbacks in the league this year, in the at least the SEC conference this year. If you put Carson Beck on Michigan, I think they're a top 2 or 3 team.
Yes.
Um, really, when you look at it.
Yeah. I completely am in lockstep with that. Now we're going to move on to some subscriber based bold predictions. Um, just trying to find the name, and then we'll get to it. Fat Sauce 45, a very unique nickname. 23 likes on my community post, said Nebraska goes 10-2 and makes the 12-team playoff. My initial reaction to that is probably I would say 4.5. Mainly because I actually do kind of find it hard to see a 10-2 Nebraska making the playoff. I do. I feel like they'd have to be 11-1 to lock that down, and I do have a hard time also seeing them go 10-2, although it's possible. I'd say 4.5. What do you think about that? And then we can give a little more analysis after.
I mean, it's possible. Like all things are possible, but when it comes to Nebraska going 10-2 right after this 5-7 year, I love this Nebraska roster. I really do. And I love what Matt Rule's doing. But with every Nebraska fan out there and everyone that has Nebraska doing good things, you just have to put that just look at the last 10 years of Nebraska. Every single year, someone big, be it Josh Pate, Joel Klatt, anyone out there, Nebraska's going 10-2,
Myself,
2021. Yeah.
2022. I picked him to um win the West and for Scott Frost to be coach of the year. And then week 3 I'm watching Clay Helton like moon
That
the
was
entire
painful.
yeah,
That was
moon the
painful.
entire fan base with like just killing this defense that the previous year was good. And I'm thinking what's going on? Like you're letting Kyle Van Treese make your
Oh my
defense
goodness.
look like a paper mache bomb shelter. It's ridiculous.
I mean, that game was ridiculous. It really was.
So
So when I
toxic.
talk, when I when I go to Nebraska fans or people that really like Nebraska, I just have to tell them, look at the past 10 years and look at the disappointment that you have gone through. And do you really expect that to change overnight like a 10-2 season would? I mean, if they went 10-2, that's an overnight change, especially from 5-7. Now with their schedule, feasibly, and Nebraska's roster right now is very good, and I love their defense. What I love especially about their defense is that they rotate guys in. I think they had the most guys rotated in on their defense. They had insane. I mean, every other series, it's a new set of guys coming in. Um, so I love how they do that, and you can't not unsee what Dylan Rayola did in the spring game either. So on paper, 10 wins, it could be there. It could be there. I mean, they'll be favored in every game up until the Ohio State game,
Yes.
unless if they lose to UTEP, they'll probably. I mean, and nothing is impossible with Nebraska, at least in recent memory, at least. But presumably they'll be favored in every game going into the Ohio State game. They will drop that one. It's at Ohio State. Let's concede that. But then past that, USC is a liability. I can concede that. UCLA at home. They get Wisconsin at home.
That'll
And then
still be
finishing up
tough. Wisconsin matches up
Wisconsin.
very well with Nebraska.
That's going to be a very interesting game to watch. Very good dynamic there. I love that game. Just early here, and then at Iowa, their rival here. So is 10 wins on paper feasible? Yes, yes, it is. But will it happen? Especially given recent history, I wouldn't bet on it. I don't. I
Yeah.
really don't. I really wouldn't.
I predicted them to go 7-5 in my regular season, and to give you all a hint, because my Big Ten predictions video, the updated one, will probably be out in like 2 weeks. I didn't just give them an extra win. I gave them like an extra few. You'll just have to wait and see if it's double digit or not. They really impressed me in the spring game, and some other teams that were on their schedule, conference and non-conference, didn't necessarily. So that changed the dynamic.
Oh, that's true.
But I
And
think that this is bold because there are areas where they're just not ready. And
oh yeah,
they don't have a Rutgers schedule, not just because of Ohio State, but because of how USC, Wisconsin, and Iowa are all sandwiched together in a 3-game slate. Whereas Wisconsin has, not Wisconsin, but Rutgers has at Nebraska and Wisconsin, but then UCLA at home will probably be much more of an easy win than, let's say, you line up like obviously Penn State at home or Iowa at home, and then you play it at USC. And Nebraska too. I don't know. I mean, part of it is me being conservative because it's them and Minnesota are the two Big Ten teams. Oh no, Wisconsin every year except for 2022 that I've overrated year after year after year.
oh yeah. And everyone's done it too. Everyone looks at the roster on paper and is like, "This roster, man. If Scott Frost can get this right, if you go back further, if Mike Riley can get this right,
Yes.
you Nebraska doesn't have a problem with rosters, with everything like that. It's really been the coaching and the execution these past
Yes.
couple of years. It really has been, and that's you can't just ignore that either when
No.
it comes to this. And even last year, you can say, "Oh, Matt Rule's going to change that." They they lost 3 games or 4 games by 3 points, something like that. All caused by the quarterback. But then someone could argue they just got Dylan Rayola, and Dylan Rayola looks like God. So, I mean,
Yeah. It was coaching. If they kept Casey Thompson over Jeff Sims, they go bowling or maybe even win the Big Ten West. That was a huge coaching error made. I mean, Kaliak Manis was throwing it 50 times against Nebraska. They had no business losing that game, and
I
here
mean,
they are just
yeah,
surrendering it in the end zone or at the 50-yard line, or losing to Michigan State and making Caton Hauser look good,
the
or
Maryland
losing
game,
to Maryland like in this,
that was
yeah,
crazy.
13-10 to a Maryland team that has little to no defense, or losing to Iowa the way they did, or Wisconsin, or even Colorado. I mean, that was Colorado's biggest and best win.
And you go
And
back to that Colorado game too. That was a game. I mean, even with Jeff Sims fumbling snaps left and right, it was still a game. Like I think the halftime score was like 10-3, something like that. It was lower. I know that Colorado was up by 7 to 10 points, and it really just it was like one or two busted plays because the defense can't play 110 snaps out there.
no.
I mean, it was like every time the offense got the ball, they'd just throw it back at Colorado's feet, and Colorado would get the ball, and then here comes the defense out there, and they would hold them to 3 and out, or and that you can't expect your defense to do that all the time. You have
No.
to let your defense rest, man. Anyway,
Exactly. Yeah, I would lower this to a 3.5, 4. Actually, I'm not gonna go 4.5, just because I could see 10-2. I think the absolute ceiling, like if everything goes properly, and this is extreme as all of my absolute ceilings would be. Same with floors, is like 11-1. But I'd say 8-4, 9-3, like 7-5, 10-2, like that 4 game stretch is probably the most likely, and anything lower or higher than that would, by my opinion, be probably an outlier based off of the spring game and everything. So
I I think if you're gonna make a conservative pick, I say they would split the Colorado and Rutgers game, so they go into that Ohio State game 6-1, and then I think they'll beat UCLA. And I think if you're going to be conservative, you would pick them to win one out of their last three at USC versus Wisconsin at Iowa, and that puts you at 8.
yeah,
Like,
the,
and that's a conservative pick there.
yeah, which shows that this is possible because it's a
Exactly.
conservative pick. Second one, this is from, again, let me find the name. Still Flockin. No, that's incorrect. Just oh no, it is. He just listed multiple, so we'll get to more of his bold predictions. Okay, this guy's awesome. Whoever you are, Still Flockin, thank you. Still Flockin says Oregon wins their first college football national championship and becomes the first 16-0 team in college football history. I'm going to put this at a 1.5 exactly. What about you?
I'm sorry, I missed the team. What was the team? I'm sorry.
Oregon.
Ole Miss?
Oregon. He picks
Oregon.
Oregon
Sorry.
to win it all.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Picks
Oregon.
Oregon to win it all,
Oregon
go
going
16
16
and
and 0
0.
and winning it all. I would put this at probably a 2 because I think Oregon definitely has some winning to grow into. I mean, they lost twice to Washington last year in games that they could have won, and games that they could have gone to the college football playoff with. That team could have gone to the college football playoff last year. Of course, I think their roster is better this year with the transfers that they've brought in. I mean, they got so many they got like 7 blue chip guys in the transfer portal, and even guys like Dante Moore who's going to sit the bench. I think that's just crazy. But
Yes.
um, be that as it may, this pick isn't bad, but I don't think that they're going to have an undefeated regular season. I think that they're going to drop one or two. But to say but to say that Oregon wins it all, I mean, I can be talked into that. I can. Um, when
Yeah,
it comes to when it comes to Oregon, they have everything they need. If Dan Lanning can execute in game, I think that they have a very realistic shot of winning or at least getting to at least the college football semifinal. I just think that they're going to drop one or two that they should have won, or maybe it's Ohio State in the regular season.
I agree
Um,
with that.
I just it's so I think it's near impossible nowadays for any team to go undefeated. I think that going undefeated is a dying breed, in my opinion.
Well, I disagree with that, but before we do that, I want to answer this super chat with 6 likes from Nitro Hunter 131. Thank you for the $5. He says, I would say Nebraska would get 10 plus wins when they can put up a real fight against Michigan and Ohio State. but I still have faith it will happen one day. Go Big Red. So this is a Nebraska fan saying
Oh yeah.
basically he'll believe it when he sees it, from what I understand. Thank you again, Nitro Hunter 131, for the $5. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. Of course, they don't have. Well, they do have Ohio State on their schedule. Check that. Um, will they compete with them? Absolutely, they will. Will Ohio State run away with this game in the third quarter, fourth quarter? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But they'll keep it tight. I mean, I don't think you can look at last year's Michigan game and be like, "Oh, you know, we can't compete against these teams." Nebraska last year was just so chaotic. That's the word I have for them for last year. Interesting in a bad way. um, but going into that game, Michigan was just not going to be stopped. Michigan last year was a special team. It really was. And I think it's fair to say you have to compete with the big dogs to be able to have that credibility. And I 100% respect that.
Yeah.
But just as it concerns to this year, with that schedule that they have, you know, they could do some good things. They really could.
A kind of a bold opinion of mine is they actually will compete with Ohio State, because I think there's a chance that actually Nebraska has the better overall trenches. And with a team like Ohio State, who's almost so insecure about being physical that they'll force it when it isn't necessary, that could be a very, like, that could be a game where Nebraska just gets in their head and Ohio State's like playing stupid because they want to prove that they're tough.
Yeah, and I
Thanks,
mean,
Ryan
you
Day.
also you also you also look at Nebraska's defensive line, and they have guys like Nash Hutmacher, Ty Robinson out there. That's they set out the spring game,
Yeah,
and those guys are monsters.
let's
They
get back
really
to
are.
Oregon. But
Oh yeah, we should.
yeah, no, but you're totally right, and I could talk about that Nebraska all day. I could talk about
Oh wait,
Oregon all day too because they're so loaded. Um, you said that you think that going undefeated is a dying breed, and I disagree with that. But you also said something that I think is important for Oregon in the sense of competing with the big dogs. And Dan Lanning hasn't, he's competed with them, but he hasn't beaten them yet at Oregon, losing to Georgia and losing to Washington every time out of the three times that he's played them, and not winning, the Pac 12 yet, which is understandable. It's year two, but he has yet to really have this key uber impressive wow win yet. He
right.
plays Michigan and Ohio State this season. Those will both probably be top 10 matchups, especially the Ohio State one. That's practically guaranteed to be a top 10, top 5
National
matchup.
television. That'll be a prime time game. Both
Yeah.
of them will at Michigan and playing Ohio State. Man, those are going to be fun. I cannot wait for the college football season. I don't know about you, but I
Oh,
wish
I
it
can't
started
either.
I wish it started yesterday, man. Anyway,
Oh no, it's that's perfectly understandable. Who do you think Oregon matches up with better? Like not home or away, just neutral field, like Michigan or Ohio State. Like who do you think they match up with better?
I think that they match up. You see, this is a tough question because I think Ohio State's better than Michigan talent
Yes.
wise this year. But I think that they might match up with Ohio State a little bit better because Oregon, I think they're very good in the trenches. I don't think they're elite, and I think that's where Ohio State is as well. Um, so I think they're going to level the playing field there. But if you take into account Michigan's trenches, I think Michigan's trenches would stomp all over Oregon's trenches most days of the week. So in that respect, I think that they match up with Ohio State really well. Also, the fact that Ohio State doesn't have like a number, they don't have that Chase Young type of player on their defensive line that can just absolutely wreak havoc. They have some guys there, but I'm not sold on their pass rush yet. And if that Oregon offensive line can give Dylan Gabriel some time with the skill position players that Oregon has and the style of offense that Oregon runs, I think that they will be able to put up a lot of points on Ohio State. Um, And then defensively, I think they match up a little bit too. I think they match up with Michigan equally on defense as Ohio State, but I think offensively they match up better with Ohio State's defense rather than Michigan's defense.
I'd agree with that totally. Um, Ohio State has a better secondary than Michigan. Michigan has a better D line, and Oregon's offense is just so good that that just balances out. But in the trenches, Michigan matches up better with Oregon than Ohio State would, and Michigan, yeah, Michigan's offense, I'd even say, with their ground game and O line, depending on how good Oregon's secondary is, that would actually be very interesting to see that play out.
Yeah.
I don't think that Michigan would actually stomp all over Oregon in the trenches. I think they'd beat them, but having watched their spring game, I've been very impressed with Oregon's trench play. I think they're going to enter the Big Ten as one of the most physical teams. I think their problem, their questions are actually somewhat coaching wise. Dan Lanning being overly aggressive. I don't think that'll work
Yeah.
against Big Ten defenses. I think that that could quickly. That's a good, like what happened against Washington in the regular season, where they let them in. They kind of let them back in that game. That's a very good way, whether you're at home against Ohio State and you want to take all the momentum out of the crowd, is like run a stupid fourth down play call, or you're on the road against Michigan and just take a field goal and you might put it away, but they go for it because they want to win by double digits and Michigan gets the ball back and they win. Those, I love going for it on fourth down, especially on like fourth and short and running it like what Michigan has done all the time for the past 3 seasons. But you can't overwork that. Otherwise, you just lose it. That's
Yeah.
my biggest question for them, honestly, is kind of that. And also just their upside in total at secondary and I would say defensive line. And they also do lose some O line players. But I listed this as a 1.5 because I can totally see them going 16-0.
100%.
Going undefeated, I don't think is dead. I think it'll be obviously harder because more games means there's a better chance that, someone messes up and you need more depth. But Oregon's worked the portal very well. They've recruited at a high level. They have a good culture. They've retained guys. And they have a great NIL structure. So if they want anyone to stay, they will make sure that they stay
Oh yeah.
with Phil Knight and that money. And their schedule outside of Michigan and Ohio State isn't too bad either.
Oh yeah. I'm looking
Those
at
are
it right now.
those are their toughest games. And it's not like Michigan's schedule where you have a Texas or a USC added on. I mean, they do have at Wisconsin. That could be a game where if they're exhausted or if they're looking a little bit ahead, that could be dangerous. But I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, they do have Washington as their rival there. I think they should handle Washington, but you never know. I do agree with you. Past that, I mean, they don't have too much on their schedule. Oregon State is a shell of its former self,
Yeah.
literally. Then they have Michigan State on the schedule 2 games later. Oregon State 2.0. But I mean, yeah, the rest of that, I mean, that's their schedule centers around Ohio State and at Michigan, and that's what they have to focus on. I think they probably. I think if I was to predict this in early on prediction here, I would predict them to split that and probably go 11-1. But that's just me. Um, yeah,
I think that's
it's
likely.
interesting.
Yeah.
But it's not out of the realm of possibility that they win both of them at all. I mean, that's not out of the realm of possibility. I just think they're. I think Lanning's coaching is going to cost them at some point. I mean, if everything went right, I can see them winning out. But
Yeah.
Lanning's coaching is a liability right now. It is.
Yeah. It is. I give him benefit of the doubt. I think he's a top 10 head coach, but I can't ignore that in the same way that I can't ignore the fact that previously, before he gave up play calling, Ryan Day, like, honestly ran his offense into the ground trying to be something that he didn't design the offense to be. Like if he just kept them with that kind of air raid spread he had in 2021 and never tried to run the ball more but just tried to improve the defense, they would have been better in 22 offensively, even though they were elite, and they wouldn't have had the same drop off that they did last year. I don't think. That's it for bold predictions. What we want to close out the show with is our power rankings for the Big Ten.
Oh yeah.
Mine is below my image, my likeness, and yours is below your image and your likeness on the screen, obviously. So tell me about your Big Ten power rankings and why you think your list is accurate, and like kind of walk me through the groupings, because I can see 1 through 18, but you may think that there's a big drop off after number 4 or number 5, or a big drop
Right.
off of number 14, or maybe number 10 is in a league of their own. Like there's a big drop off from 9 and then a big drop off after 10 as well. Explain that to me if you can.
Okay, so I think that you're going to agree with me when I say 1 through 4 is its own grouping.
Yes.
I think that upper tier of Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, Penn State's going to be 4, and then how you sort 1 through 3 is your own opinion, and you're entitled to that. But that's really the first. I mean, what we were talking about earlier with the Big 12. This is what the Big 12 doesn't have. This first grouping. Um, but then past that, I think USC, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and to an extent Rutgers are in this second tier here of teams. Ranking them, that I think they're all going to be identical. Not in play wise or whatever. I think just in general, just overall, I think they're going to be pretty close to each other. There's not going to be that big drop off. There isn't really a drop off at all between USC and Nebraska. There's not really a drop off, in my opinion, between Wisconsin and Rutgers. You can split hairs about who's better, and of course we did that. But from there, um, I think that they're all these teams that can have a surprise run um, that can be these teams.
Yeah.
And then I think Washington at 9 I think Washington is a top 10 team in the Big 10. I just think that they have a pretty low ceiling. Like I don't see them winning past 9. I think that their ceiling is about 8 9 wins. From that sense. And then I think Iowa is kind of like you said with 10. I was just kind of there. Like I I don't like them, but Kirk Ferentz, he finds wins. This is what when Scott Frost was at Nebraska, people were always trying. From what I could see, Iowa versus Nebraska, it's a rivalry. Iowa found the wins. They did, and Nebraska found the losses.
Yep.
And Iowa still finds the wins. They do. They'll pull a couple wins out of their ass that they really shouldn't have any business winning. I mean,
Absolutely. They
they will. So I think when you're power ranking them, I think that their roster doesn't match up well with these other 9 teams in the top 10, but I think that they will be ranked inside this top 7, maybe top 8, because they're going to find those wins.
yeah. Oh yeah, they're gonna punt and kick and scream and just like this ugly earthworm in the ground, just dig their way to win. It's insufferable. I'm glad that Brian Ferentz is no longer there. His nickname on this channel was "He Who Shall Not Be Named." It's just so disgusting. It's just
Oh my gosh. I mean,
couldn't watch them. I loved seeing Minnesota beat them last year on that controversial call, because it's what they not the fans, but like it's what that staff deserves for wasting that defense. Is they
oh yeah, and I
deserve a
mean,
game where it, by all accounts and purposes, you lead 10-3, and then you choke and let Minnesota go on a 9-0 run and beat you in your own stadium.
Iowa, I mean, and the fact that they've won 10 games last year with Deacon Hill playing in most of them. Deacon Hill. Goodness. I got to get off of Iowa. I could talk about Iowa all day. Um, I really could.
He's just
Michigan State. Michigan State. Moving on. They have a
yeah,
ton of upside, but it's going to be a lot of growing pains with them.
yeah.
Northwestern. I love David Braun as a head coach. He's awesome, but I don't know if they. I don't think they have the talent to be a top 10. They're probably one of the least talented teams in the Big Ten, but just through coaching, I think they're going to be a really good team. Um, and then I have this. I starting with, well, not start. I think Maryland is kind of the in between, and then once you hit Minnesota, on down to UCLA, Illinois, Purdue, and Indiana. I think that's kind of the last grouping, with Indiana, Illinois, Purdue probably being a little bit step below. But I just really don't like Illinois. If I were to make one change to this, I would put Purdue over Illinois. Don't like Illinois this year. Really don't.
Yeah, and then that's sad because they return a lot more production than they did entering last year, but they just have questions. You have to see if Brett Bielema. It'll all be coaching. It'll all be coaching because they haven't used the portal either. They're going to be very interesting, and they host Kansas. That's a game for revenge.
Oh yeah.
Um, so we might learn a little bit, even though Kansas, loses some coaches and their defense. We might learn a thing or two in that game. Like, are they dead, or whoa, could they like win a lot of one possession games or something? Yeah, I don't disagree much with your power ranking. I mean, the biggest thing I disagree with is probably USC at 5, or or Purdue being that low. Like, that would be probably it. I could see Washington being as high as 9 with the portal players they've brought in. I could see Minnesota still being like insanely mediocre, even though I think they did well in the portal. And I could see myself being wrong on Maryland taking a big step back. Yeah,
Yeah,
like what you've brought on.
Maryland is a tough. It's a pickle to really predict. They're not easy to predict. They lost their 2 3 year starter in Tagovailoa. I don't know too much about MJ Morris, but I don't think they're very deep. Second of all, but I could given in more information, I could be talked into them being a little bit better or a little bit worse than where I have them. Um, Michigan State. Michigan State's another team that's hard to predict. I'm extremely high on Aiden Childs. I love Aiden Childs as a quarterback. He could be a top 3 quarterback in the Big Ten Conference by the end of the season. He has the talent.
Totally agree
He
with that.
really, he really does. But you're marrying this team that in Michigan State that was really bad last year roster wise, and then you're bringing over half of Oregon State, and there will be growing pains with it. It's going to be like Nebraska last year, just insane growing pains that's going to happen. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I will go as far to say that I think they will reach Indianapolis at some point in Jonathan Smith's tenure, because I think they have like a top 10, top 5 staff. But it is year 1. They've lost in the portal. I don't think Tucker recruited not just good players, but some of the players he recruited that are good just aren't team players. Tucker, I don't think, was a team player guy, as that whole ordeal showed. I like Childs. I really do. I like parts of their O-line, and I really like Nathan Carter. I really like their running back, Nathan Carter. But that's
Yeah.
basically about it, outside of Jordan Hall at linebacker. My Big Ten power rankings, I have the same top 4 as you do. Only thing I would disagree with is I think Penn State can be higher than 4. I know that James Franklin is James Franklin. However, I think Andy Kotelnicki's the best OC in the country. Their defense is really good. The D line, linebacker core, their D line returns all their interior players, and Dennis Sutton and moving Abdul Carter to end. They're going to have a vicious pass rush. They've recruited well on the O line, so if their O line plays to its ceiling, they, with Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, could have really good trench play. And if Aller improves with that scheme that Kotelnicki has, I think they could do some damage. But I do have a hard time seeing them as the best team in the Big Ten. I think that Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan have a much better shot at that, which is why I have them at fourth. I have Ohio State
Right.
1, Oregon 2, Michigan 3, Penn State 4. I just think Penn State is a higher ceiling. I think they have one of the highest ceilings in the country, actually. I just think their average level of play isn't going to be at that ceiling because I think Franklin holds them back. He is the ultimate jokester in terms of game management when it matters. I have Nebraska at 5. There's Oregon, no, there's Ohio State, Oregon, and Michigan. I'd say there'd be a slight drop off to Penn State. Bigger drop off though to Nebraska. I think Penn State's still kind of in that top tier.
I agree. I agree.
Nebraska at 5. I love what Rule's doing there. I think that they're going to be a physical team that can pass and also run. Their question is depth in the secondary. That's why I said Wisconsin matches up well with them, because even though I think Nebraska is a better team, Wisconsin with Van Dyke, with that O-line, and with Will Pauling is probably going to get more into the air raid of Phil Longo rather than last year when they retreated back into running the football. And their defense for Wisconsin is kind of fast and more like defending the pass, and Nebraska wants to pass the ball more. So I just think that's a good matchup. But
That's going to be a fascinating matchup, really is.
Yes.
And Wisconsin got Tackett Curtis too, the best linebacker in the portal. So I mean, that's going to be. I'm fascinated by Wisconsin. I really am. Anyway, sorry for interrupting.
No, you're perfect. It actually it helps the flow, as we talked about. Yeah. I'm fascinated by them too. I'm lower on them after watching spring ball. Now, they didn't have a spring game, so that might be a little unfair to them, and I still think they're a top 25 team. They're going to be better than last year, and I think Fickle's on the right track. Their schedule's just insane, though, but I'll get to that in a few seconds. Rutgers, I have at 6th. I think that, yes, their schedule's easy, but because of their trench play, their defense, they'll be such a consistent team that you'll have to power rank them high. Like, they won't have that upside that even Wisconsin will, or USC that I have at 7th, but their level of play will be very consistent. I think Nebraska, Rutgers, and SC are in their own tier. USC by far having the highest upside out of all of them. But also, I think having the lowest floor, too. I think USC is this team where I think no matter what, they'll be better than last year, but their schedule could be anywhere from moderate to extremely tough. I could see them having a worse regular season record, but being better, just because of how, like, Notre Dame, LSU, non-conference, and then a bunch of Big Ten teams that'll be able to run the ball and therefore match up well against a team in USC that's kind of the opposite of Michigan. Like, they're all skill players, and I like the hires they made on defense, but you're not fixing that defense in year one, especially the D-line when they failed to get interior players. And then after SC, I think there's a slight drop-off to Iowa and Wisconsin. I have Iowa at 8th. You just got to appreciate the consistency, the defense.
You do.
Again, like winning 10 games with Deacon Hill. And
it shouldn't happen, but it did.
Yeah, I loathed watching them like win those. Like, it was disgusting. Like, I hated every minute of it. I was watching Iowa, Illinois, and I was the biggest Illinois fan for that game, and it made me sad when Caleb Johnson ran in for that touchdown. Like, yup, this game's over. Um, and then them getting shut out by Penn State, Tennessee, and Michigan. They lost a combined 101 to nothing. 101 to nothing in those three in those
It's
three games.
I'm at a loss for words for last year's Iowa.
Yeah. Michigan
I
played
mean,
like one of their most anemic, boring games in Indy, and like it was never a contest. It was ridiculous. But
I
you got
mean
to appreciate
Michigan
the consistency.
Michigan didn't look like they were trying in that game. I mean,
No. It was
they
the
were having a party
worst.
on the sideline.
It was the
It was
worst O-line performance I'd seen from them since like the COVID
oh
year,
my gosh.
and they still like game controlled Iowa to death, which is what Iowa does to people. At ninth, I have Wisconsin. I mean, they play Alabama, Penn State, and Oregon. Very tough schedule. They have all of them at home. Schedule I just mentioned really for just because schedule doesn't really have a bearing on power rankings. That stuff's already taken. Like it has its own place, but power ranking is like a 6-6 team could be better than a 9-3 team in power rankings, of course.
Very true.
Wisconsin, I think, just has a deep O line, good coaching, and I think Tyler Van Dyke is an underrated, overhated quarterback. At 10th, I have Michigan State, Minnesota, Washington. I'd say those three teams are in their own tier because they all did well in acquiring portal players. Washington and Michigan State lost very good portal players as well. Minnesota didn't really lose anyone they cared about in the portal, but they all did well in the portal. They all have some type of new staff because Minnesota lost their defensive coordinator, Joe Rossi, who's a big part of their program. They also lost their quarterback. So they all have changes at these key positions, Michigan State and Washington especially. And they're all teams that not last. Uh, I nearly made the biggest mistake of my life in saying that Washington had a bad year last year, which they didn't. That would have been terrible.
At least you
Michigan,
didn't.
yeah, Michigan State and Minnesota had bad years last year. Washington didn't, but that's so easy to forget because of all the turmoil and turnover they've had ever since that national championship game appearance. And I think all of these teams have fairly high upside and high potential, but also a very low floor. Not the same ceiling that USC does. I think the most that these teams could do is win like 9, 10 games. That's even pushing it for some of those three. So
Yeah.
maybe 8, 9, and in some cases 10. That's the best they could do. They could also all have losing seasons. And they return a variety of production. Minnesota's top 20, Washington's close to dead last, Michigan State's middle of the road. But the portal and key changes and kind of they're at a crossroads in a way. These three teams are. And they're also all coaching staffs and strength and conditioning staffs that I really like in one way or another. After that, Northwestern, Purdue, Illinois, Maryland, UCLA, and Indiana. I would say Northwestern, Purdue is in their own tier. Another slight drop off to Illinois, Maryland, and then a slight drop off to UCLA and Indiana. Northwestern's intriguing because they have a very
They
low
are.
ceiling, but they return top 10 in production. And depending on who they get in the portal at quarterback, because I assume they're going to try and get a portal QB since
Hopefully.
Brendan
For their sake.
Sullivan went to Iowa. That's a big pickup, by the way, for Iowa.
Especially
Because,
if because McNamara is, sorry to interrupt, but McNamara is injury prone, right?
yes,
So
and he may not be good even if he is healthy, because last
that is
year
true.
he looked a lot worse than he was at Michigan, which made me kind of sad. Purdue, they're great in the trenches. I love their size, especially at D tackle and interior O line. CJ Smith, I think, will be a weapon at wide receiver. And I'm not high on Hudson Card, but compared to the other Big Ten West quarterbacks, he was serviceable. And they
Oh
have
yeah.
Dylan Thieneman too. So they have players. The question is, can they put it all together? And they once again have a tough schedule. Illinois, Maryland, UCLA, Indiana. They're all of them are not high in returning production, and all of them have been on the downturn in terms of recruiting over the past few seasons. For UCLA and Indiana, they have new coaches, a lot of new rosters, some returning players. I need to study more on some of these teams, but it is May after all. I'm going to continue to do
That
that.
is.
But I don't like the look for UCLA or Indiana. I mean, UCLA before Deshaun Foster was hired, I had them going 10-2, and Chip Kelly just getting kicked out the door in the middle of the year because I didn't
Oh
think
yeah.
that their roster was built well to handle the Big Ten. At least now they have Foster, and he should be given grace in year one, so the team like has some kind of consistency. But yeah, that's my power rankings.
And I mean, I don't disagree with your power rankings at all. Really. I think Minnesota's a little high for where they're at. If you look at their trajectory, it was a lot of 9-win seasons, and they've kind of been on a downward slope now. And I don't know if I trust an FCS quarterback in Max Brosmer to really do that much. But I didn't trust Ethan Kaliakmanis either, and Minnesota won 7 games. So, I mean, Northwestern is really an interesting bit. They have a low ceiling, but a higher floor. Like they're kind of right there, and they don't really have the talent, but their coaching is just so good, in my opinion. You look at what David Braun did last year. Just I mean, he got it with 5 minutes to go in the season, and he turned out pretty darn okay. I mean, they beat Utah. Like
That was
I,
impressive.
it was it really. I was not expecting that at all, and when they went and beat Utah, I think they're a little higher on this, but I mean, it
Yeah.
is May after all said.
Yeah, I want to do a Northwestern video before the season starts. It's been so late just because I've been busy and my head's been bouncing around everywhere. But I was really impressed with the job they did. And I didn't talk about it a ton on my channel, but it was impressive with the players they had. And then they have some underrated players. Like,
Oh yeah,
um, I forget his name. Ben Bryant was underrated at quarterback. Cam
when he was
Porter had,
healthy.
yeah, yeah, because he was injured. Cam Porter was a decent athlete. Cam Johnson, Bryce Kurtz, AJ Henning. I mean, they had some underrated receivers too, and they have some defensive players as well who earned some decent honors. So they're an interesting case study for sure. That's really it. I'll look in the chat to see if there's any questions. I imagine that there are. Actually, I do see there are a lot of them. We'll answer those for a few minutes and then we'll get you out
Oh
of
yeah.
here. Okay. Um, Let me go over everything. Okay. Just scrolling through to find questions. Um, Pink Castleton. Ewers not a great quarterback in the Big Ten. This was a reference to an earlier comment of mine. Better than any quarterback in the Big Ten. That's for sure. I would disagree in terms of Miller Moss and Dylan Gabriel, but that honestly might be it. Like there is kind of a point here. And that's even me who I wouldn't have Ewers as a top like 4 or even 6 quarterback in the SEC. Like I'd have him middle of the road. That's how deep I think that conference is. What do you
I
think?
think I think if you put Ewers in the Big Ten, if Rayola plays to his potential at Nebraska, he could be better than Ewers. I think Will Howard's going to be way more consistent. The numbers might not match up, but I think Will Howard is a better. I trust Will Howard more than
Interesting.
Ewers, but I think that's about it. I really like his running ability, and I think he has work to do in the passing department, but I trust him more with the ball. I think
Understandable. I mean, I Will Howard's interesting. To
he is an
pretend
interesting case study.
to pretend that he's infinitely better than McCord is child's fantasy. But McCord, like you said, is better than a lot of people give him credit for. So I still think Will Howard's a great QB. It's just more the conversation of, is he really that much more of an upgrade than McCord? But yeah, I mean, I don't think Ewers is great. I don't. I think he's been blessed with a great supporting cast. I think he has a great schemer in Steve Sarkisian, and he has the natural talent. And yeah, the Big Ten QB rooms suck, but I mean, I
I mean,
mean,
they've always sucked.
yeah,
Let's be
exactly.
real.
They've always sucked, and regardless, Ohio State last year, or or Michigan for sure. I mean, they would have pwned Texas like instantly, especially Michigan. Or you go back to other Michigan teams or Ohio State teams and compare them to last year's Texas team. Or look at what's a oh yeah, like 2020 tw- I mean, at this point maybe I am rambling. I think I actually was there and I'm sorry about that.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're fine. I love rambling. It's the best.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ewers is good. Not saying he sucks. He certainly doesn't. That would be inaccurate. That'd be intellectually dishonest. I'm just saying that he's not elite. To act like he's going to be this day one pick, I
Or a Heisman contender,
I mean
like I see most people saying in the national media.
yeah, I mean he last year was like JJ McCarthy in 2022. He just had a much better game plan for his passing game, whereas Michigan had a much better game plan for their run game. And Ewers doesn't have the athleticism that McCarthy does. He doesn't even have the Mahomesian-esque ability. He doesn't have that insane high upside with the crossbody throws or all of a sudden becoming like a scrambler that can run for a 50-yard scramble if need be. Ewers doesn't have that. Ewers out of high school was meant to be this legendary pocket passer, and he just hasn't been that. Just watch the game against Washington. Washington's secondary wasn't good. For much of the year, it was a lot like Texas's. They had Jabbar Muhammad, and they had a much higher upside. And they were better than people gave him credit for, but statistically, they did not have a good secondary. And he stank. He could not hit. He could not hit NFL receivers against that Washington secondary. So
And
that's my problem with Ewers. I have a really, really big problem. More so because the national media than you, Pink Castleton. Thank you very much for the comment. I appreciate it. There's some other questions, but some of them, like, I'm not gonna answer this up here, but Armand Hammer asked, "Will Arch Manning transfer?" That window's already closed. I mean, he literally can't right now.
he physically cannot, even if he wanted to.
Yeah,
Maybe it's for the best, maybe it's not. Eh, it's not something I pay too much attention to.
yeah, exactly. Okay, come on. More of them are down here. Michael Valdez, this isn't a question, but it's a comment. Scott Frost runs Franklin in choking. It's actually the opposite way around because Scott Frost, fun trivia fact, Scott Frost is 1-0 against James Franklin.
The 2020 season, right?
Yes. The
That
the Luke the
weird
Luke
season.
the Luke McCaffrey um the Luke McCaffrey disease fest is what I'll call it because
Oh
Adrian
yeah.
Martinez didn't even play a snap and they won that game.
Became an NFL player at Rice at wide receiver.
You gotta respect
Who
that.
who would have known, man? Luke McCaffrey, wide receiver at Rice.
Yeah.
I bet you didn't have that on your bingo card.
Nope.
Me
I
neither.
certainly I certainly did not. If I were a betting man, I would have lost that bet. I would have never have thought after that he would have
I
become an
think
NFL player.
100% of everyone else would have also lost that bet.
Uh
99.9, he probably would.
yeah. Pavel Strelchuk asks Wisconsin at 9 in power rankings. This is obviously for me, but you can answer this
Mm-hmm.
too. Wisconsin at 9. I'm going at a slower pace because this won't be cut into like any YouTube video, and
Okay,
this
yeah,
is
yeah.
more chill. Um,
Does he mean that in a way they should be ranked higher or lower? It,
probably higher, but
I
it
would
could
assume
it could
higher.
be lower. Um, outside of their O line, I don't see any high ceiling positions. Like it's O line and Will Pauling. Maybe Tyler Van Dyke, but I think he's proven enough over the past 2 seasons that he has some inconsistencies. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, O line, wide receiver, QB, maybe I am underrating Wisconsin. And maybe with that Mike Tressel defense, if the offense goes perfectly, they could be higher. I just don't think everything will go perfectly. And I do have some questions about their identity. Especially with at running back, they brought in Tawee Walker. Ches Malusi just can't stay healthy, and I would love to give him benefit of the doubt, but I can't. And
Yeah.
I don't.
I'm not big on Tyler Van Dyke as well as a starting quarterback. I don't think he has a high ceiling. He could be a reliable player, but I don't see him as like a high ceiling guy.
Yeah, which is interesting because in his freshman year in 2021, he was tearing it up. So
Phenomenal. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he does have a high ceiling, but he hasn't shown it the past 2 years. Outside of that game against A&M, but A&M secondary was the worst part of their defense by a mile. I think they were top 10 in efficiency for ESPN's like FPI or top 15 defensively, but that secondary was their kryptonite. It was. I mean, Jalen Milrow averaged like 15 yards per pass attempt against them.
Yeah.
Good old Jalen
Yeah.
Milrow. I actually think that he's going to be elite this year, and I really like him. I think that
He's a
he's
guy. Sorry, go ahead. I
no,
did it again.
no. It works with the flow. You say what you're going to say. I want to hear it.
I mean, he's going to be a Heisman contender. He has that, first round quarterback material on him. He's true dual threat, kind of like a guy like Lamar Jackson.
Yeah. Okay, a few more questions. Nitro Hunter 131. Thank you again for the super chat. This time he has just a regular question. Is there any team that you think will have a breakout year? How about you answer first, Eddie?
As a breakout year, I think you look at a team like Nebraska from going 5-7 last year, and like we talked about earlier, could get 8 wins relatively easily and 9 wins if they pull an upset or two and maybe 10. I think they're a team that is going to take a huge step up. Also, a team like Rutgers, like we talked about earlier. Outside of those two, because we already did talk about them a bit, I could see Michigan State pulling an 8-win season because of the talent that they have on that roster. I compared them to last year's Nebraska team, but I think Michigan State this year has more talent on their roster. And they have if you have a quarterback, you have a chance, and they do in Aiden Childs.
Is there any one team outside of the Big Ten that you think could have a breakout year?
Outside of the Big Ten, interesting. I think Virginia Tech is going to break out. I don't think anyone is seeing Virginia Tech
Darn it! You
coming.
you stole mine. You stole mine. It's okay.
Uh-huh.
That shows
I
you know
beat you to
what
the
you're.
punch.
That shows that you know what you're talking about. I
Yeah.
think. All
Tell
right.
me. Now
So
we're at a standstill here.
yeah. Okay. So Michigan State, Nebraska. Rutgers, Virginia Tech. I like that. I really do. Nitro Hunter 131, I would say the same for those, except um I'm not gonna go there. I can't. I was so close before Ohio State made all their portal moves and returned what they did. I almost had Penn State like going 12-0 and making a playoff run, but I can't do that anymore. Especially after seeing a spring game where Aller looked inaccurate. Granted, there was a lot of wind, so I'm factoring that
Mm-hmm.
in, and maybe I'll change my mind eventually, but they didn't do enough in the portal, I think, at receiver and other things. But maybe, just maybe, Penn State, but I'm not going to say that. Just forget that I said that in terms of like reaching the playoff and maybe winning 2 or 3 games. Um, I agree with everything that Eddie said. A non Big Ten team that I would say you can pay attention to for a breakout year is, geez, I mean that's tough. We already talked about Syracuse. I think Miami, Florida, could. As much as I am grossed out by Mario Cristobal and his game management, they have talent. And I like Simeon Barrow. They got him from Michigan State. I really like Cameron Ward. He's been there for the whole preseason. Looked good in the spring game. They added
Oh yeah.
Sam Brown to a receiver room that had Xavier Restrepo. They brought in Damian Martinez to go along with A.J. Allen. That's going to be a deep running back room. And Shannon Dawson, he resurrected that offense after Josh Gaddis, who somehow won the Broyles Award, wrecked it in 2022. So, and their schedule's easy. Like Florida
Oh
State's
yeah.
their toughest game, and they host them at home and outside of at Louisville and maybe at Florida. They kind of have like 8 wins baked into their schedule, maybe even 9. Another team, I would say it could be very unlikely, but Georgia Tech returning Haynes King and upgrading on defense. That's kind of like Penn State, not in the same way because they're totally different, but in the same way that watch out for Penn State to maybe make a spark, and they might have enough talent or enough competency on the offensive coordinator position where Franklin just maybe leaves Kotelnicki alone to let the offense cook. For Georgia Tech, if the defense improves a little bit and Haynes King works on turnovers, they could beat Florida State. Or they could compete and maybe upset Georgia. After all, they were in position at times to do that last year against Georgia. They were competing in that game.
For sure. I
And in the
mean,
oh, you go
yeah.
ahead.
If I'm gonna throw one more name out at you, I think Iowa State as
Oh,
well. I think I don't know too much about them, but I think that what I know about them in a hectic Big 12, that's a team to look out for, in my opinion.
yeah. Oh, they're number one in returning production. So that's
Yeah,
you hit the nail on the head right there, man. And last but not least, I would say is Colorado, but that's only because there's so much chaos and they have skill players, so
yeah, they
they
do.
could, you know. I'm mainly saying that because people like would like to believe it's impossible, but I almost say sadly it isn't. Sadly, not because I don't like Dion, but I don't. Shadur just reeks of arrogance to a point where I can no longer stand it.
For Colorado, man, the one word I have for them is it's a circus out there. I mean, it is. Like, and even Deion Sanders, I read something, I think yesterday. He said that this whole recent, we won't go in too much into the recency between, all the Twitter engagements with older other players and such. But he said he did it because he was bored.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
a college football coach should never be bored.
No.
If you have time off, you should be recruiting. You should be getting out in the transfer portal. I mean, Yeah, it's a circus out there. But as it says, as what you said, I think that they're so unpredictable. They could take a step up. They could get 7 wins. I mean, the Big 12, like we said, it's hectic out there.
It
It's like the
is.
Wild West out there. So in that sense, I agree with you that they could do that, but they also could finish with like three wins.
Yeah.
They could. They could finish with 4 wins. I'm more inclined to say that they'll finish with 4 wins because I still don't see the depth at a lot of positions out
Yeah,
there.
same here.
And all it takes is for Shadur to get hurt or Travis Hunter to get hurt, and that team is done. I mean,
Yeah.
and Deion Sanders, you know, whatever.
I will say though, Jim Harbaugh was running his mouth early at Michigan, and even though those Michigan teams weren't as good as the recent ones, they still had enough talent to find ways to win, and that was in a tougher conference. So Colorado could be that
True.
team where it's like, shut up, you're not a national champion, but they're still like, yeah, maybe they get like 7, 8 wins, or maybe somehow even like more, and they're just good. But like for the attention they get, they're still incredibly insufferable. But that would be probably in my mind my least likely one to break out. I just think they'll
Yeah.
improve, but not break out or do anything special.
I think they'll look nicer. Like last year, at times, they didn't look like a functioning team. I mean, especially toward that back half of the season when Shadur got hurt and Hunter was banged up, and I mean, it just looked rough. I think it'll be more of a coherent system. Their offensive line, I think, will get better because it was pretty low last year. I think the defense will be a little bit better, but I think only marginally. Um, yeah, clickbait. That's what Colorado is right now. Clickbait,
Yes.
and very effective at it too.
Okay, two more questions, then we'll get out of here.
Hmm.
Actually, if you don't mind, three more, but we'll stop there.
I got all night.
Okay. JW, which two teams do you have in the Big Ten championship game? I have
Oh, this is a good
Michigan
one.
and Ohio State.
This is a good one. I think Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan's going to be there. And then a team that you don't expect, like Nebraska or Rutgers, is going to be right there because of the amount of wins that they will have. You could say Wisconsin as well, Penn State. Penn State's schedule isn't too bad either. But all that being said, I think if you're going to give me two teams right now, it's Ohio State and Oregon.
I respect that. Makes sense. And that is the pick. I'm for better or for worse, I'm higher on Michigan than most people are. And that's now a consistent theme too. For the past for the 4 seasons I've covered the sport now, I've been higher on Michigan in win total every single time compared to the national average. Even in 2021, when I thought that Harbaugh should get fired or was going to get fired at the end of the year, I thought that they would get a win or two more than most people predicted. So we'll see if that streak breaks this year. I think they get in over Oregon because they have a tougher schedule, and I have them in that. I have 4 teams going 8-1. Oh shoot! Well, this isn't going to be a cut. I spoiled part of my Big Ten prediction because I previously had Ohio State going 9-0.
This is just between you
Whoopsies.
and me,
Yes, exactly.
right?
And like
And
what
the
the
40-ish people
yeah,
watching.
the
Yeah.
30, 40. Okay. Yeah, so guys, I'm picking Ohio State to lose to Oregon. That's a change that I made, and that brings Oregon and Ohio State into that tiebreaker scenario with Penn State and Michigan. But since Michigan and Ohio State have the toughest Big Ten schedules in terms of combined wins and losses from their opponents, in my opinion, they go to Indy, which will make Oregon fans insufferably mad. Penn State fans won't care. They'll just be happy that they got 11 wins and understand that their
Yeah.
schedule is a piece of cake compared to everyone else's. I mean, what their toughest game? Their toughest game could literally be at West Virginia outside of Ohio State. Like, come on.
Literally, could be. I mean, Penn State fans just got to be smart and look at your situation that you're in. You have James Franklin, so you know you're not going to be elite, even though Well, the best of the
They
best.
deserve better. They deserve
If
better
you
than
if you
Franklin.
put this roster with a better head coach, let's say you put Greg Schiano or Matt Rule with that roster in that scenario, they're probably considered national title contenders, but they're just not there because they everyone has seen what James Franklin is and what he does. He recruits well, brings good players in, but can't get past that level, you
Yeah.
know.
You put last year's Michigan staff with this Penn State roster, they'd be my natty pick instantly.
Oh my goodness. That
I'd
yes.
snap my fingers, no question, and it would be. I wouldn't list him as good as last year's Michigan, but I think this year's going to be a down year anyway, so I'd be just as confident in making the pick, even if I think they'd be a worse national championship team. Instantly.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. I 100% agree.
Second to last question. How will Dylan Raiola pan out for Nebraska? This is from Leo Menke.
Okay. How will he pan out if we're talking his full 4 years there? It is an interesting question. How will he pan out for this year? I think he'll do fine as long as he doesn't get hurt or something like that. I mean, he showed in the spring game that he has elite arm talent. The thing with him is that he doesn't run particularly well. He can scoot, but he can't run particularly well. Um, I think he'll be successful in year one, year two, year three. I think he'll do very well. And if he gets to year three, at this point, he might just be off the NFL at that point. If he keeps with the trajectory he is at, he could suffer a major setback. He could get his elbow landed on or something like that, and it would ruin his arm or something like that. This is just stuff that you can't predict, this injury
Yeah.
stuff or outside sources. You know twist his ankle running a class or something like that. This is stuff you can't predict that could happen within 4 years, and he's gonna have some learning curves to do. I mean, Big Ten defenses are not high school defenses, however good your high school is. Um, that's my thoughts on him. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that he gives Nebraska serious Big Ten championship contending potential in 25 and 26. That's my thoughts. I think he's going to be really good. And while I'm not going to go as far to say that he'll be a first round pick for sure, because I'm not an NFL draft expert or anything, he certainly he isn't like Cade Klubnik. And again, this is a spring game, but I don't think he's going to be like Cade Klubnik or even like Quinn Ewers, where they're rated super, or even Aller, where like, oh, all highly rated out of high school, comparing them to NFL QBs, and plop, nothing.
Yeah,
Just, and by nothing I mean like they're anywhere from average, or in the case of Klubnik, kind of gross or below average, to like good or great in the case of Ewers, but they're not elite. Raiola looks like he could be elite in the same way that McCarthy looked like, if he just put a few things together after 21 or 22, that he could be elite. And he turned out to be pretty darn close to that in 23. Raiola has arm strength, he has accuracy, he's not a risk taker, but he's not overly conservative either. I If the O-line just isn't trash so that he doesn't get beat up and destroyed as a freshman, I think he'll be very good.
and Nebraska's going to help him out as well. Like their running back room, they don't have an elite playmaker there, but they have four guys that are very good.
Yes.
They have guys in the wide receiver room that they have a ton of wide receiver, a lot of young ones too. And you bring in guys like Jamal Banks, Isaiah Nayer. Isaiah Nayer looked very good in the spring game. Guys like Ja'Cory Barney, these younger guys, like they're helping him out. Like it's not like he's out there on an island, you know. So he's gonna get a lot of help, and he's a very smart player as well. You know, he's been brought up by a lot of quarterbacks. I even heard he's training with Patrick Mahomes this next month.
Well, that'll be
So
good for him because he
that,
does
yeah,
have some athleticism to him. He's not Kyle McCord. Like, he can You could run like an occasional read option with them to like fake out defenses, and it actually would work. And last but not least, from Wolvergeek, are there any worries that Alex Orji potentially being the starter could lead to another situation like we had with Joe Milton, obviously in relationship to Michigan?
Yeah. Um, I don't think so because I think Orgy shows a lot of upside. I can see the comparison and I can see the scare. I just don't think it will happen. Having an offensive head coach will really help them in Sharon more. Um, but I want to hear your thoughts on this too.
I think that it's understandable in the passing game, but Orgy is so athletic that if he can't pass, they'll just run a triple option shotgun and try and run teams to death. They won't like force him to pass. They'll do what Paul Chryst, if he sucks as a passer like Milton did, I think they'll do a more modern and innovative way of what Paul Chryst did with Mertz in 21, where they ram teams into submission, except that with their talent they'd be much better than 21 Wisconsin, and therefore much scarier. I mean, 21 Wisconsin, if they just had Jack Cohn or a competent QB, that team would have won the West. I mean, in every power
That's
ranking
true. Yeah.
and efficiency metric, they were much better than their 9-4 record showed, but they had a tough schedule, bad QB. Michigan, I think Orgy is higher upside, and I think his athleticism kind of alleviates the fear of him being a total liability in the way that Milton was. And even if he is, I don't think you'll have the same situation with the team that Michigan had with Milton, because I think this team is deeper, they're better trained, and I think defensively they're much better than they were in 2020 because, yeah, that defense sucked.
Yeah.
And so did the O-line. So, like, even, I don't know, I think Michigan's at a point where it was this way with McCarthy in 22 and 23, even with the uber talented QB. You needed him at times, but he wasn't carrying you. He was complementing what you already had and just gave
Look
you
at
higher upside.
look at the Penn State game last year. I
Well, that
mean,
was beautiful. It's awesome.
I mean, ran the ball 672,000 times because, protecting against Chop Robinson. I mean, JJ McCarthy didn't do anything right there. I mean, he really didn't. And that's the beauty of Michigan, and that's what I think. That's why I think they'll be very good too, is because the Jim Harbaugh implant will still be there. They're not changing anything. They're gonna be elites at the fundamentals. Elite at tackling, elite at blocking, elite at knowing the playbook. Um, and I think those are all traits that will just carry on through Sharon Moore's tenure that was implanted by Jim Harbaugh.
I agree with that. I do. And I think Sharon Moore is a future great head coach, but we'll see where that goes because he's never been a head coach. But I have faith in him, mainly because the way he managed the end of that season. I know it's different than managing a whole season, and it's not like Harbaugh was suspended for that whole month, but he still had to execute and make adaptations in game, and I was impressed with what he did. That is all we have. There might be more questions, but it is past 9. We can't go forever. Thank
I
you
wish
all.
we could, but we can't.
Yeah, we can't. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
Remember to search up Big Ten Quick Talks in your search bar and go give Eddie some subscribers. I mean, he knows his stuff. And this is good. This felt really natural and was a whole lot of fun. So we'll make sure to have him back on, as with many of our previous guests on Touchdown Talk. Please make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell for my channel as well as his, as I've already mentioned, so that you can get notified when I release more college football content, Big Ten football content, and also go live like what we did tonight.